Good afternoon. Welcome to the Sioux Falls City Council informational meeting for Tuesday, July 8th. Welcome. We have a very nice crowd of people interested in today's proceedings here at Carnegie. Welcome to all of you and anybody that might be watching on CityLink or on the internet. As we do with all our informational meetings, we begin with our City Council open discussion. Councilors, anything you would like to discuss openly? Councilor Jameson.
Thank you. Dave Bixler and I actually have been talking and working together on the budget. You know, we've worked on this over the years, trying to make the CIP in a more presentable fashion. I think you've seen something in your mailbox. Hopefully you've all gotten that. We did this last year, if you remember, some of you, most of you. It's a new way to look at it, right? There's a couple pieces, but Dave has worked very hard. And as the fiscal committee chair, I'm always trying to figure out or find ways that would help you as counselors understand the CIP better, get the things that you want, answer questions that you have, those kinds of things. So through this process, it's a great idea to get together with Dave and spend some time one-on-one with him, just walking through it. I mean, even guys who've been around, it's for many years, you still forget about some things. And Dave is right in there with it, thick and thin. He's a great resource. That's part of why we hired him, was for right now and these kinds of times, and digesting the whole budget, the CIP and the operating budget. So utilize him. That's all I want to state, was make sure you utilize him. Encourage you to find a time to sit one-on-one with him, and try to do it other than a Tuesday prior to this meeting, so your brain is maybe just a little more clear. He's a great resource for us, and make sure you use him. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Jameson. Questions? Other comments? Other open discussion? Seeing none, we'll move right into our agenda. Today we have two presentations. The first one is on we have a transit task force that met several times, and today Councilor Rex Rolfing is going to lead our presentation. This is going to be fairly involved in what most of the people here are interested about today. So we'll start out with Councilor Rolfing giving us an overview and introducing some of the key players.
Thank you very much, Councilor Karski. This task force was started about 6.5, 7 months ago with the charge of looking at the total transportation system in Sioux Falls. There are some changes that needed to be made. We all knew that there were some changes that needed to be made, and we wanted to make sure that we did it in the most productive way that we could. And so with that in mind, this group met probably 7 or 8 times, and they worked their tails off. I mean, they were there most of the time. You guys, if you weren't there, you know, when we met, it was full in the meeting room right next door. People came and were genuinely interested and worked hard at coming up with solutions. So I wanted to thank them by reading their names publicly first, so that everybody knows who that is. First, Todd Vick, Mark Lee, Lynn Hunter, Lila Peterson, Betty Olenkamp, Chris Schlitz, Sarah Jennings, Bob Bohm, Vicki Kirkley, Phyllis Ahrens, Connie Sims, Orlin Cheddar, Kate Helgas, Lon Clemenson, Gene Crow, Myron Moore, Molly Keegan, and of course our wonderful staff, Jim David, Dave Bixler, Amber Gibson from CCOG, and Sam Trebelcock from the planning department, who will be giving a major part of this presentation. But I'm not going to go take away Sam's thunder on this, but I wanted to go through a couple of things that he may not get into as much detail on, and I wanted to say it now. Our goals, if I can just go over them very quickly: reduce the cost of paratransit overall, and especially some of the paratransit to somewhere around 25% of the budget, instead of almost 50% of the budget, which is what it is right now, and is completely not in line with what other communities of our size are having. Increase of fixed route service. We've got major parts of the city that are not served by any fixed route service. And so by doing that, we're gonna take care of some of the problems that we have. Foster community-based collaboration of funding, the annual operation budget in different ways. I'll go into a little bit of that later. Develop multifaceted travel training program. We found that by training people to ride the regular bus or other modes of transportation, we can cut down some of the costs and allow us to expand some of the fixed rates. So that's going to be a big push in the next years. And lastly, provide long-term financial status reports to this body so that we know that this budget is in line with where we want it to be. Let me just go into some of the things that I don't think that Sam probably is going to go into as much as I would like to, but just to touch on some of them, we're going to actively encourage people with disability to ride the fixed route system, and that'll allow them a lot more independence than having to schedule a time that they're coming, that they're going. They'll have more opportunities to do that, and there are people who can do that at different times of the year. Transit travel training program to increase fixed route ridership and decrease paratransit. As I said, that's part of the process. We're going to do a lot more training, training their peers to help them get to and from the bus and to the places they're going. Update training, train the rider program. We need to train riders. We found that if they can be trained, people can be trained to use a system, not the paratrans, but the fixed rate system. They're very satisfied with it in most cases, and therefore will take away from the paratransit and other systems that are overburdened. A real-time fixed route app, an app that'll tell you exactly how to get from where you are right now to the nearest bus stop and when that bus is going to be there, to the minute. That would help tremendously with people, especially with disabilities, who want to make sure that they're there on time to be able to get to the place that the places they want to be, and then increase some service to the areas south of Sioux Falls and west of Sioux Falls that are not yet served by the fixed route. Some of the things that have already been done: directory of service, a directory of available services being printed as we speak. Community volunteer driver recruitment program is in the works. We found also that if we can have more drivers, we can recruit more drivers to, for instance, Project CAR. The things that they're able to do will expand dramatically. What they're lacking are volunteers to drive. And so we're gonna put a program together to get some additional drivers. We're looking at another area there. Under objective number 3, to reduce reliance on paratransits, we will be doing some agency contracting with some of the nonprofits around to work on work trips that, for instance, Dakota Abilities and Lifescape have. Those amount to about 50% of the rides that paratransit does right now. And so by moving those to another area, we're able to save some money there and increase the amount of fixed routes that we have also. This isn't going to be done slam dunk, it's done tomorrow. It'll be phased in over 5 or 6 years so that people have time to plan and get ready for that. I'm not going to take up a lot more time, but one of the things that we are doing right now to help that exact situation is contracting with a nonprofit ride provider to come in and work with Dakota Abilities and work with Lifescape to help them cut the cost of what that will be, so that there will be another bus service, if you will, in town, a nonprofit one helping on along those lines. Those are some of the things that we have planned. The other thing, without going into a lot of details at this point, we are prepared to, and I'm sure Sam will go into this a little bit more, to increase the cost of riding the bus. It seems like percentage-wise, it seems like a lot, but on a dollar basis, it's not that much. We haven't changed fares since 1995, almost 20 years. And we heavily subsidize the bus route. The feds are going to be doing the same. Have been doing the same thing, and we, as I know, Councilor Staggers and I especially don't think that money's going to be there for much longer, and we need to get this back on our situation if we want to have a bus system here in Sioux Falls. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is turn this over to Sam Trebelcock so that he can give us a little bit more of the details, and then Councilor Jameson is going to wrap it up.
Thanks, Rex. First of all, Rex has been very involved in just about every single meeting we've had. I'd like to thank him for that, and Greg too. Their leadership on this has been really important, and certainly Kenny's been involved in the task force, and that's been very helpful in this whole process. But Rex has been involved, I think, just about every single subcommittee meeting we had, he was there. I think if he wanted to now apply for a general manager position somewhere else, then he could probably do that. He has that much knowledge in transit. I'm going to take you through the task force. Some of the things that Rex has mentioned I'm going to go over again, but we'll keep it pretty short here. Now, the tasks of this task force really were to recommend a long-term sustainable strategy for Sault Ste. Metro and the community-based transit to the City Council here. So that's what we're bringing forward here. And really to further develop work action based on a coordinated transit plan that was finished up by the Southeastern Council of Governments last fall. And we'll talk about some of that coordination, how it kind of wove that into this plan also. And also to develop a fare and operations analysis through the year 2026. So what we're doing is, and I'll show you as we get to the end, how we've put together and worked with finance a lot about figuring out how this will help create a sustainable system through the year 2026. Really a very important part of that for our budget, for your budgeting needs in the future. Goals, as Rex mentioned, I'll just go through quickly again, reduce the cost of paratransit over the next 5 years down to 25% of the total budget. What that does is then gives us the ability then to, in goal number 2, to increase the fixed route services by about $1.6 million to provide services to the growing areas of the cities that we have. Goal 3 is to, and that's every year, $1.6 million every year additional that we can reduce paratransit by, we can put into the fixed route system. Goal 3 is to look at fostering a community-based collaboration for funding annual operating budget. We try to make these measurable. I think there was some discussion, 500,000 sounded like a lot, but when you're doing some rides that we are within this community, that's the kind of number you're going to have to work towards, is some kind of a community-based transportation system, nonprofit system that starts out at that level. Goal 4, as Rex talked about, it is really important that we look at a travel training program. We're doing some travel training now, but we want it to become more proactive and look to instruct at least 1,000 people a year how to ride the bus and in different manners. Everybody has different needs and the ability to do, in their abilities to be able to do that. But we think that's where we have capacity. That's where we have the biggest possibility to serve the most people. Goal 5, again, provide that long-term financial status report. Now I'll go into some specific recommendations, as Rex was mentioning some of these too. First of all, is increased our fixed route service and utilize fixed route buses, again, getting back to help reduce some of our paratransit trips. Recommendation 1A was to actively encourage people with disabilities to ride the fixed route transit system for a more independent lifestyle. We know it's not necessarily going to work in all cases, but certainly, as you know, our fixed route buses are handicap accessible. Wheelchair spots are available. And so we know in a lot of cases if we work towards some travel training, we even talked about, as Rex was kind of mentioning, what we call a buddy system, that in some cases that we could do that in shorter term or even longer term situations, and again, work towards more of that independent lifestyle in most of the times of the year. Recommendation 1B is to update and invest additional resources in a transit travel training program that we have. We've already met as a subcommittee has met to recommend some ways that we could do that. We have a video out that needs to be updated. We have different ways that we could do that. We think that's an important investment that really would be a minimal investment and get huge rewards from that. Objective 2, increased nonprofit coordination. This has been talked about for a long, long time, and if there's ways that we could get the nonprofits to work more in coordination, we could get more rides for that out of that coordination. And in that way, it encourage services and projects that implement goals of the coordinated plan. And that comes through the MPO process, or the Metropolitan Planning Organization that Southeastern Council of Governments facilitates. And there is a transportation coordinating committee that's working on some projects that Rex already mentioned. Objective 3 is reduce reliance on paratransit. Just about half of our budget is on paratransit now, 150,000 rides. We know it's an important system, but we want to see if there's ways that we can utilize our fixed route system at a higher level, higher budget level. So some of the recommendations for that is to focus efforts to reduce paratransit agency work trips. We're specifically talking in the areas with Dakota Abilities and Lifescape. We've talked with them on numerous occasions, already made headways in that areas, and continue the discussions in how to do that. And what we're looking at is a 5-year process to do that. Recommendation 3B is a contract with some nonprofit agencies to provide some rides, in some ways with Project CARS or Worker on Wheels. We have a process that we're already working on with Project CAR to try to do exactly that. Recommendation 3C is to develop a paratransit system that parallels the Sioux Area Metro fixed route system. And I'll kind of show you how this works. We right now have a paratransit area that kind of looks like this. The area in yellow and kind of light yellow is the paratransit area that we are required to serve by FTA. The area that's in brown is the area that we also serve locally. We're recommending that that area at some point in time at least mirror our fixed route system. And the requirement is 3/4 of a mile from any fixed route. That doesn't mean, as we expand the fixed route system, of course, we would have to and be required to expand into that paratransit area. So it certainly would make it much more efficient for our system if it did just that, where the fixed route is available for anybody that needs it, rather than just the paratransit being available, and it becomes more inefficient and more expensive for the system then. Objective 4, we looked at taxis and private assistance. What we recommended out of that was to develop a corporate funded project for event transportation. There was a lot of people that were saying, hey, we need some help in some cases getting back from events, especially late at night, to provide rides home for people with disabilities or people with disabilities that are not within the service area. Affordability, again, we still wanted to mention that and continue to talk about the Pass It On program that we have. Right now we do, I believe it's 40,000 passes that are provided to some of the social service agencies that might need them for different rides to different, whether or not be for a job interview or certain situations to get them back on their feet. So we wanted to be able to continue providing that assistance, and at some point in time as we grow to expand it somewhat. School services, we really emphasize providing adequate fixed route services to the public high schools and not requiring the dedicated buses that we have now. So we're recommended ending what we call our tripper service, which is the dedicated routes, because they really hold us buses that are only being used a couple of times a day. And we would be looking at trying to find a way to replace those buses. We've worked with the school on that process, and they understand the situation that we're in there. But again, the emphasis is trying to provide better services on our fixed route system to those high schools. 7 is fares, and maintaining fares that are very affordable for riders while still providing some consistent level of revenue. As Rex had mentioned, it's about 20 years since we updated our fares now, so the task force did recommend updating fares based upon this scenario that I show up on the screen. Essentially, we're going from $1 to $1.50 for one rides, and then our monthly passes would go up to from $25 to $30, and then would come up every couple of years to about a $40 pass by year 8. That would mean that paratransit would move to $3. The most we can go up on paratransit is double the one-ride fare. So that would where it would move it to $3. Now, knowing that paratransit does cost the system about $24, while fixed route costs us about $3.50. With these recommendations, what this brings and shows you is where were we at when we started this process back in 2013. Kind of shows the transit fund balance and how that goes into a deficit situation by the year. Well, really, it started out this year. We're not in that situation because last year we made some changes, and you can see how that in the 2014 proposed and adopted, we made some proposed changes, and then we made some changes where we adopted some changes for some fixed route additions, and you can see that just made some changes in the projections. But even after last year, we certainly had some issues for long-term sustainability of the system, and so that's why you as a council asked us to come back and take a look at it in a long-term view. So with these recommendations, we're able to maintain the system at a reasonable level. Above, and the fund level, of course, stays in kind of that level that's certainly in the black. To be able to do that, and I don't know if we start to show this here, I just got to go back to this. Some of the things that we had to include was additional resources from the city level. What Finance is recommending that we do is that we include $750,000 additional for capital purchases. And that really is to take the place of what the federal government was providing in money and funding over the past 10, 15 years. And so in order to be able to just keep buying our vehicles, replacing them, and buying some new ones as we go, that is what is going to be required. So that's also as part of this this plan is additional resources from the city, including also about a 4% increase projected level in operating support from the city. Now with this, you can see what we're trying to show here also is one of the goals was to reduce our paratransit level down to about 25%. If we reduce our agency work trips and some of the other recommendations, and we do some of the planned additional routes that we're recommending, you can see this on this chart, on the top chart. We're recommending some additional route increases in 2016, 2019, and 2022. And then with some of the reductions in paratransit, we would get to about 30% of the total budget is to paratransit. So we're getting close to that goal level. If we were not, and this is the bottom chart, if we were not to reduce some of the agency work trips or also some of the other recommendations and no additional routes, you can see we would still maintain about a 50-50 budget. Fixed route would both of them would continue to come up, of course, but as inflation and other expenses increase. But that's the situation we would be in without the recommendations. Also, what this shows is how the city's contribution continues to increase. This incorporates the 4% increase and also the $750,000 additional in capital funding for vehicles. The city is showing continuing increases in contributions in a percentage level here. And this is also taking into consideration the city's already been doing that. Really, our increases over the past 10 years have averaged about 5.8% in increases to the system. So we're continuing to do that here, and we've been doing that in the past. You can see the federal is remaining fairly static, and our fares, we're going to see somewhat of an increase, but that's still a pretty small part of the pie. With that, this task force is, as Rex has said, has been going on for quite a number of months. There's a lot of things that we have in the plan that talk about implementation. We would be going through that process, starting with the budget in 2015. Coming forward with the 2015 budget, you would see some of the recommendations included in the 2015 budget as we've shown in the plan. But we want to take any of your comments or any of your recommendations. So with that.
Thank you, Sam. I believe Councillor Jameson is going to kind of wrap up this presentation.
Well, yes, first I want to be the one to thank Sam for all of his work and his hard work over the last 6-8 months. Rex did a lot of heavy lifting as well. I got sidetracked with another little thing that I was working on, and Rex was able to fill in completely, and that was very much appreciated. I just want to wrap this up quickly. We do have members here of the task force. I think almost all of them are here. Rex had mentioned their names, but some of the organizations that they represent, I think you might recognize more readily. For instance, Sioux Falls School District, Sioux Falls Chamber of Commerce, Avera McKinnon, Esurance, Lutheran Social Services, Coke Hazard Architects, AARP, Dakota Abilities, Independent Living Choices, NIAMI, I think that's how you say that, Siouxland Association of the Blind, Sanford, Project CAR, Children's Care Hospital, Achieve, VA Hospital, Good Samaritan Village, Active Generations. A lot of great organizations in the community, and they all came together to sit at the same table and work through these tough choices that we've got to make. And so in wrapping this up, we started this conversation because there were changes that were recommended to the transit system in order to save some money, because the cost is increasing. Sam and his staff could understand that the balance of the system was out of order. Having paratransit using almost 50% of the budget was not a healthy system. What we've laid out and what's been proposed here is the start to get to a healthy, balanced system. But there are some tough choices that all of us on the council are going to have to make. I don't know if you picked all of those things up through Sam's presentation, but continuing to fund transit in a more aggressive fashion is part of it. Not just the capital plan, but in the operation plan. So there's two pieces right there that we started this back in October because we had to get done now so that if we wanted to make changes to the budget, we'd do them now. That was part of our objective. And we were able to get to that point. Increasing fares is not going to be very nice. Not everybody's going to like that. But as was mentioned, it's been nearly 20 years since we've adjusted those rates. It seems only appropriate, right? But the last one, I think, which we're going to all find the hardest is a phasing approach to bring the 3/4 mile distance of the paratransit service back in order. We heard that through our testimony at our task force meetings when individuals were very concerned about that. It's going to change the way they live, to change the way they work or not work. And as some of them put it, it was very liberating on how they could, their lives could change, being able to get to some place, get to work, get to school. We've talked about a phasing approach in that effort to make it an easier transition, maybe a 5-year plan. But not all of us are going to be around here for 5 years and for all the years to come. But I think if we start this plan, maybe the future councils to come will understand what we started, and they'll continue that effort for years to come too. But anyway, we've got a lot of work to do. There are members here, Mr. Chairman, of the task force who, if they were so desired to speak to the council, I think it would be great to give them a chance to address us if they so wish. And if you have questions for Rex or myself or Sam, we're certainly here.
Thank you, Councilor Jameson. It is the elephant in our midst, and ignoring it isn't going to make it go away. Councilor Anderson, I believe you're involved in this task force. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, not at this time. I guess I will say just a little bit. It was a real comforting feeling being in that room with the different people that were in there representing the different nonprofits and for-profit companies. This is something that has been a long time need to get all of these entities together and start discussing this problem. And I'm just really happy to see that, you know, it was something that was done because they wanted to do it, not something that was forced. So I personally want to thank each and every one of you and the companies you represent.
Thank you, Councilor Anderson. And along the same vein, if there's any member of the task force that wanted to come forward and maybe address any part that was missed, or if you please, if you're a member of the task force, we'd welcome your input. Just please give us your name and maybe where you're from, sir.
Good afternoon. I'm Bob Bohm. I'm the Executive Director of Dakota Abilities, and my name's on the task force, and I was very happy to be a participant. I voiced several times. Members of the committee have heard it. I'll voice it to you now. My concern is not necessarily balancing the budget or looking at the revenues, but the destruction of a system for people who have disabilities. To cut out 75,000 rides back and forth to work, some of the most efficient rides that are possible as part of paratransit. I understand the numbers, I understand the risks, and I understand all the things that we face as a community, but I find it very difficult to say that that's the best approach to it. The plan we've presented, and it has my name on it, is a plan. I don't think it's the plan. I think it is a plan. I applaud Sam and all the names, and Rex and Kenny and Greg for the efforts that are here. There are not easy things to do. I'm not in agreement with every single ride that a person from Dakota Abilities has being taken away from them. Can I do it? Maybe. Can another component of the ongoing process be the process that provides it? Perhaps. But this system was created for people with disabilities, and they're using it. That's why it's here. My agency over the last 5 or 6 years is largely dependent on Medicaid. Christine's heard it. She was in the legislature. The issues that are there are funding is provided in a very fixed level. In 2009, we had no increase. 2010, no increase. 2011, no increase. In 2012, we had a 7.5% cut. And we've had some small increases since, and we're not yet back to the rate structure that I operated under in 2009. And now I'm being told that 38,000 rides will have to be provided by my agency for people who have disabilities. Not a great thing for me to anticipate as we go forward. I hope that we can deal with this as a beginning and create a plan that will help people with disabilities. My folks are not the only ones that will be impacted by the changes that are made here. Many folks came to our meetings and said, hey, my husband and I live in a small house, and if paratransit's no longer able to take me somewhere, do I have to move? Do I have to sell our house? I'm going to lose my job. What do I do? And I know we don't deal with absolutes and individuals and all of that as we deal with the issues we have, but there are more things that I think need to be vetted in the process. Even as we do this, the agency rates that are part of this will create a barrier so that my folks, they are left out will now have to pay the agency rate, in other words, the full cost of the ride if they choose to use paratransit, even though they're qualified and have been using it for some time. Because we're supposedly have vocational rehab. I only have 4 people who would qualify under the rules that are inherent in the reporting here, and 1 of them uses paratransit. All the rest of my folks can't benefit from the use of vocational rehab to provide them gainful employment. In fact, gainful employment is defined as an integrated setting, not involving people that are caring for them. Fully integrated at not less than the minimum wage. I only have 4 people who do that, and none of the others do. And yet those rides will be excluded. So there's a lot of stuff I think that's still not finished. I mean, I know that this is a report to get us started on a plan, and it goes from year to year. It's not going to take place tomorrow. That I understand fully. But I don't think we're done. And I'm not accepting it as complete as we might all say that it is. That's only my voice, but I needed it to be heard. I am a strong advocate for Chad and for Brett and other folks like them that are here, for friends and neighbors, and my own son who lives in a house with people with disabilities. There's no way that they can be left out as we go forward. And I will continue to do that and be a participant in the process as favorable a route in a favorable way as I can. So,
Thank you, Mr. Bone. Questions for Mr. Bone? Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank
And
you.
for your service to this task force. It is a work in progress. Anybody else from the task force that would like to come forward? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to the council then. Councilors, questions, comments? Anybody? Councilor Staggers.
Yes, I was wondering, from the members of the task force, have you taken a look at other communities that have come up with some innovative projects? Because from what I've heard today, it sounds like we're just kind of revamping a little bit of our current system and not making any real fundamental change.
Anybody from the task force care to address that?
I'll start that, I suppose, if I could. Fundamental changes are going to be difficult to make for sure. As mentioned by several people, it is going to take a lot of time and work. And a lot of the things that were projected in this task force recommendation are things that haven't been fully vetted and fully completed. There have been things we've started and hope for the best. And if they do succeed in their ways, we will have a better system in the future. I wish it was cut and dry and that we could go to Fargo and get their program and plug it in and we'd all be just fine, but it isn't like that. I think it'd be fair to state that we have, I would say, a Cadillac system in Sioux Falls for paratransit service providing paratransit services, a Cadillac system. Other communities do not have our system, as I understand it. And that's why we're not in a healthy way either. And I think we reviewed Fargo's plan, a lot of other communities, and what they've done, why they are healthy and why we are not, rates that they pay, rates that we pay. I think we reviewed a lot of other communities. But if you've got more ideas, or if even anybody has more ideas, know that we want to take those in and try to incorporate them. We tried to do as best we could with everybody that we had at the table. And I think we came up with some neat ideas and things that we never even thought of. I mean, the task force members did it. It was the magic out there that brought it together. It wasn't Rex or I or Sam and the staff. It was those guys. And Rex and I sat back and we go, that's the magic that we wanted to have happen. And I think it'll keep happening. But yes, we're always open for new ideas and other ideas. So if something does come up, sure, bring it to us.
I could add to that.
Councilor Rolfing.
That's a really good question, Kermit, and something that I like innovation. I like to have new ideas and things. And I need to set aside, if you will, the AARP and Sarah Jennings, who has made, the state director, who have made a significant, not only time effort, but also some money aspects into this planning also, because their group is the one a lot of times who is affected by this. She had planned to bring in a national consultant, which she did, and we had meet with this task force. Now, she had a lot of ideas, that person, along with, it was just one of those throw it on the wall, let's see if it sticks kind of sessions, and literally that's what we did, with ideas all over the place, and that's where a lot of this came out of. And then, as a secondary to that, there is a gentleman named Gary Hagelin out of Fargo, who is another bus consultant, if you will, transit system consultant, who's been working with us a lot during this whole time also as part of a contract that they have with AARP. And so it's been, we have had some of those people in to get ideas from other places that, like you talked about, they've been able to pull some of the ideas they got from different places around the country and kind of plug them in, and we've reworked them a little bit into this plan. So, you know, your idea is great, and we had, you're correct, I should say, and we had a lot of that. You would have, some of the crazy ideas we had to start out with obviously didn't make it, but we really did have some good ideas, and we're implementing the ones that we think can work and to help us in the Sioux Falls area.
Other questions? If you could refresh my memory from the task force, our total budget for transit and our paratransit budget, do we?
The approximately 9 million and about a little over 4.2, I believe, is paratransit. So, yeah, 46% is paratransit of that 9 million.
Okay, and if I could, one more question there. One of the first goal is to reduce our budget from 48% to 25%. Why 25%?
That seems to be about the average, Sam, and maybe you can address this. That seems to be about the average of what most cities have as part of their paratransit when they're, as Councilor Jameson said, not a Cadillac organization, not a Cadillac system. And maybe I should explain that a little bit more. Do you want to explain that, Sam? Why outside the three-quarter mile?
You know, really, we looked at 25% because we were able to provide, on the flip side to the fixed route service, you know, a reasonable amount to provide growth to the system, and that's really what it got down to, was about a 25%. I mean, some communities are much less than that. You know, Fargo, North Dakota has about 50,000 rides a year on their system. You know, we have 150,000 rides. We're comparable size communities. You know, they probably have less of their budget as goes to paratransit than even the 25%. So you're right, it is more of a Cadillac service when you're approaching anything over that 40%.
And maybe we should explain that the reason it got to that level is because federal, and correct me again if I'm wrong, the federal government, when they give us funds for the buses and for some for operation, say that we have to provide paratransit service for non-work related, correct? Non-work related rides, non-work rides?
Well, you have to provide paratransit for anybody that is not able to utilize the fixed route bus system. Where it gets in, and what we're talking about the work trips, is those are for agency trips.
Yeah.
And in Fargo, North Dakota, for instance, they do have an agency rate. And Madison, Wisconsin has an agency rate for organizations when you're dealing with work trips, or in some cases with nursing home medical trips. Those are considered agency trips.
Can you put the map back on there?
Yes.
One of the reasons ours is a Cadillac operation is that if you look at the map that we had right there, you see the white kind of area right there? That's the three-quarter mile route that within 3/4 of a mile of the fixed route system. We chose from day one to do it for the entire city of Sioux Falls, which takes into consideration a lot all the way around the peripheral. That cost a significant amount of money, along with the agency rides. And so what we want to do is go back to what is required by law, the 3/4 mile radius or range, and then look at the other areas that we can cut some costs and get rides to people still Not that we want to leave them high and dry, but we want to get it to them and try to not compete, but to cut the costs a bit on it. Automatically, when we increase ridership or when we increase a new route, we put a new route in. For instance, one of them is 57th and Cliff, 57th and Minnesota. That will expand the 3/4 mile radius. So we will automatically pick up some of the people that are on this situation, right, that might be caught in this situation now. And so it's not exactly what everybody thinks. We're just going to cut and, everybody's going to be out. That's not it. So that gives you a little better idea, explanation of why we considered it a Cadillac operation.
Any other questions? Councilor Erpenbach?
Can we talk timeline a little bit? I know we've talked about phasing things in over a 5-year period. And Councilor Rolfing, when you're talking about that idea of, I understand that 3/4 mile line, and we've all known all along that we went far beyond that, almost out of the goodness of our hearts years and years ago. But talk about phasing in then. If we're headed for a fixed route that's going to go to 57th and Cliff and then over to 57th and Minnesota and wherever, is there a time period where we come in, we come back to that 3/4, that's all that's required by law? Is there a difference in the time from that kind of condensing our routes and that expansion of the fixed routes? Is there a period of time where if I'm in that area, I'm sunk for a little bit?
No, because one of the proposals in this is to grandfather in those people until we get them into that situation. So they would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sam, they would be grandfathered in if they're still outside the 3/4 mile range. We would not just say, hey, we're not going to provide it anymore, but we are going to say no more after this point. And then we would grandfather them in, and until the time that the bus route would be close enough.
Yeah, I think that, if I may, that first place to start on implementation would be grandfathering the people that have their trips now. We have talked about that included in the implementation plan. And then you would start looking at where you're expanding your routes to. Obviously, you wouldn't take rides away from people if you're going to be expanding into that area over that 5-year period or such. And then you might eventually start finding that some of those rides would change as people move. And then you just wouldn't add, new trips, new rides outside of that area.
A good example that I need to kind of put in your minds, I guess, would be that, not example, but a piece of statistic is that for someone to go back and forth on work rides, or someone who uses the paratransit almost on a daily basis, it is $10,000 a year for that. Now, that doesn't sound like much, but all of a sudden, 50 of those is $500,000. And so we've got to be careful where we're at, and we've also got to do a good job of letting people like Dakota Buildings, Lifescape know when they build homes, like we did last week. We said this is on the bus system, so that they don't build homes for people with disabilities somewhere where they're not on the bus system or within that 3/4 mile range, and we're not then able to provide service for them. Same thing we'll work with Sanford and Avera for the same exact reason. If they're building clinics out someplace way out nowhere, yeah, people are going to expand out to it, but they're not going to be able to get there by buses. So we need to work with them also, and we are.
Councilor Erpenbach.
I might just then dovetail on that. I think what part of this is coming down to is how we have to understand how the federal government is working at this point, and how this is one of those times where services are not being provided to the level that we expect them to be provided by the federal government. And those services are being pushed then onto the local municipalities, that we're not able to do that necessarily. And my other concern for this then is, all that being said, is that I want people to be able to ride the bus, but I also want them to help pay their share. You know, I think that we talk so much about independent living, and we talk about, you know, the kind of lifestyle that we have, but I think that we need to talk more about how everyone pays their share. And I'm concerned that we're only going to raise it to $1.50 over 5 years. And so I'd like to hear what the rest of the group thinks about that. $1.50 is not a lot for a one-way, and it puts us only at $3 for a paratransit ride one way. I just, you know, I know that this is not the end of that conversation, but I really want to think about what should those rates really be. And let's look at what other communities are doing. And if you look at that chart, we're way low. Even at $1.50, we're way low.
If I might be
Yeah,
able
go
to
ahead.
talk a little bit, we did talk about, you know, what about going higher than that? But the concern is, and what's happened in other communities, when you raise it, because it is your affordable way to get around.
Right.
And if you go too high, and we started looking what other communities in our area have, and typically you see that $1.50, $1.75 at the most. You know, and we know that we can start to move on our monthly. That's where we're getting our funding, though. Our money is from people that are using the monthly fares. So we know we can move $30 to $40, but we don't want to do it too fast. Otherwise, what tends to happen is your ridership drops. And Eric Meyerson, our general manager, experienced that when he was in Little Rock. They raised it, and they did, and you'll probably see some ridership decreases regardless. So we've actually increased our revenue stream, we've kept it at $1 because our ridership's come up double in that same period. So we want to be cognizant of that too.
And don't hear me arguing with this. Hear me trying to process this. I think as a community, and I see folks out here that are asking us for, you know, some pretty amazing things to happen, but I think we have to look at all of this. And I know the task force has done an awesome job doing that, but now we're in an even more public setting. We really need to process this at a deeper level, you know, and I appreciate that. That's, you know, that's a great analysis. I appreciate that.
Two things, if I could add to that.
Counselor?
By raising it 50 cents and the $2.50 on the monthly, we're projecting only $200,000 additional income, which is what, 2% of the total budget? This is not a pay-as-you-go system, folks. I mean, that's it. We get, what is it, $1 million a year in revenue, and we're spending $9 million. This is a swimming pool. This is our swimming pools. You know, it's the same difference as our swimming pools. Basically, we charge $1 to get in the swimming pools in the summertime, and it costs us a lot more than that to run it. But it's one of those things that we need as a city, that we need to continue to provide, because it is good for the city, and it's good for the environment, and it's good for everything that happens around here. One last thing we haven't mentioned is that one of the things that we want to do is to get in and educate the employers. I just saw it was at today's paper. We have 15,000 people working in downtown Sioux Falls. There are not near that many that take the bus. And if we could get them to start taking the bus more, it would be also very beneficial to the whole system.
Counselor Kiley?
A couple of comments that I'd like to make. Number one, it is a huge challenge considering a reduction in funds and an increase in needs of the users as well, too. And looking at the 5 goals that you've identified, it's obvious to me anyway that many of the goals, achieving one goal is dependent upon achieving other goals in that list. For instance, goal number 4, training individuals that currently rely on paratransit to be able to transition to the fixed route system. That's heavily dependent on achieving goal number 2, which is increasing the fixed route system, because currently there's large segments of the city that are not served by the fixed route, particularly my region, the southeast, and Councilor Jameson, your region in the southwest as well. So until we can increase the fixed routes, we leave a large segment that basically out in the cold, and I do not want to see that happen. The obviously there is paratransit does account for a disproportionate amount of the overall budget, but we still need to focus on serving the needs of the individuals. So that's why I'm happy to hear that there is a grandfather clause for the individuals that are currently using it. But boy, we have to place a high priority on expanding those fixed routes if we're going to achieve goal number 4.
Councilor Jameson?
Maybe I could wrap some of this up and move it on. The couple issues, raising the fares will not get us out of our trouble or make us a healthy system, but it is part of the steps that need to occur. The other thing I wanted to point out is that Councilor Erpenbach got right to the heart of the matter on the timeline in place to adjust that 3/4 mile service. I can tell you right now that the heartburn that you will hear and feel later is looking at people who are reliant on paratransit services, and their lives will change based on what we do. And that doesn't happen all the time on the city council. When we do things like that, it changes somebody's life. It's a big deal. That is the heart of the matter. And it may not be a time for me to find that, because we'll have it grandfathered in, I'm sure. Somewhere down the line, that line in the sand is going to get drawn, and it's going to be very difficult. But as long as we think about a healthy system, a growing community, I think we'll do those changes at the right time, and we'll start balancing this service, which is a great investment in our community, great investment for us. Same with our parks and our roads and other services that we provide. The way that we support public transportation in this plan going forward will be a huge asset for the city of Sioux Falls. But Councilor Erpenbach got right to the heart of the matter.
Councilor? Yeah.
I just had 2 more quick questions. One is, did the task force consider operational changes in terms of fuel sources for the buses? I know that ramping them up, changing to something else like natural gas is very expensive, but in the long run it's cheaper. Have we talked about that? Yes. Am I getting a nod? Yes. My other question is what happens next?
Rex and I actually talked about that last week, along with a few others. I think that is something that even at the city level that is going to be looked at in part, whether or not natural gas would. It would be something that would take some pretty big upfront costs. So I think if council and administration wants to pursue that, that's something we can look at. I think it needs to be studied further, as you mentioned. What is the payback period going to be on the cost? But it's certainly something that probably should be looked at long term.
And then my other question was what happens next?
Yeah, and that's a great way for us to kind of wrap this up. I'd like to hear from one of the co-chairs. Where do you want us to go with this?
I would add that, if I could, Rex, the thoughts are that talking with Sam and Mike Cooper, the idea we'd want to probably put a resolution together and have it adopted by the city council, have this plan adopted, accepted, recommended formally in that fashion. But there's going to be budget implications coming forward that we'll have to include in the operating budget coming forward, the capital budget going forward, executing the increases in fares would have to be approved by us to come. All those things would be happening pretty sequentially here shortly. So those would be the major next steps. And making sure that if we do want to grandfather the 3/4 mile thing, and we've got to do that as well, and I think as part of that resolution, that would be stated there.
Yeah, I would think that that's exactly right. And if we could ask our legislative operations person, Mr. David, to work with Sam and maybe me and some of the other department heads to put a resolution together, and then we can get this started so that it can be part of the budgeting process. And then that'll also give a time for some public input at that time, additional public input that we had during the task force, but some additional now that we know what the formal plan would be, so that we could hear from them, and maybe some new ideas will come out of that. Who knows?
Okay, Councilor Anderson.
Sam, question. When's the next PTAB committee meeting?
Right now, next PTAB meeting would be the end of August.
The end of August?
Right.
Probably too far out.
Well, we have, with PTAB, made a recommendation already on this task force report, they recommended approval of the task force.
And that's fine. You know, I mean, the one thing I've looked at is the task force has done this work. We now have a plan,
Right.
but we haven't really given a lot of public input to this plan now,
And
that
that
it's
was
formatted.
Yeah, it was, this report was provided to PTAB for their end of June meeting, and that report itself was recommended for approval at PTAB with public input.
Can I, PTAB, acronym?
Oh, sorry, Public Transit Advisory Board.
Okay, not everybody might understand that acronym.
Yep.
So that meeting is again at the end of August, and their
The next
input
one.
into this has been what?
Say that one more time.
Has been that advisory board's input into this process.
You know, during the meetings, they've been advised of what's going on during the task force and then the recommendation. And then they'll continue to be included as part of the implementation of it.
Okay. Counselor Anderson?
Then will this be put on our city website with information for people to contact you or whoever with questions or
Yeah,
comments?
I believe it's, Jim, is it on the website? Yeah, it's on the website now, on the city council, on the task force site now, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So, from what I'm hearing, we'd like our legislative and operations manager, Jim David, to draft a resolution for our consideration. Do we have a date in mind?
How about, let's see, we're the 8th.
I know our August 5th meeting is really filling up, from what I understand already. Our city council meeting is August 12th, too far out to be involved in the budget process.
Maybe we could ask, from the budgeting standpoint.
Tom Huber at the Finance Office. A couple things. The capital program already includes the $750,000 that you saw that's been presented to you. And then the operating budget will be coming forward along the lines with Sam, the recommendation that Sam provided. And you'll have your hearings here in August and your working session meetings. So through July and August, and we adopt the budget in September. So you should be well in advance of anything needed from the budget.
Counselor Anderson?
Say if this is passed as a resolution, it would be basically used as a guideline to make changes by the administration. So I think any of the financials should already be in the process of the CIP, or if
the
they're not,
I believe they are,
we
yes.
need to make them now.
Yeah, they are
So,
doing that.
but this here is just, once
They are.
again,
You're doing
would be a guideline on changes in the future.
And the budget follows.
That August would be a bad thing to make this.
I'll recommend the 12th then.
August 12th. Are we okay with that? Okay. So by August 12th, Jim, if you could have a resolution. I do anticipate probably a fair amount of public input at that meeting that evening. So welcome it, and that's why we're here. We'd love to hear from people. And if you have public input that you'd like to talk individually to counselors because it makes you nervous to get up in front of a forum like this, we completely understand that. So you can contact any of us through the city website. So we do welcome very much the ability to talk to our citizens, our constituents about their concerns with this or any other issue. So, all righty, we'll wrap that agenda item up and we'll walk into then Jim David with our draft provisional legislative priorities. Mr. David, welcome.
Good afternoon, Jim David, City Council staff. Before you are 7 provisional legislative priorities that have received council consensus. These items include council opposes any legislation that would inhibit municipalities from providing services requested by citizens in whatever form the citizens approve or oppose any legislation that restricts local control over taxation and spending. The City Council supports legislation allowing municipalities alternative publication options. The Council opposes any legislation that would reduce, remove, repeal, or reallocate the municipal sales tax, liquor tax reversion, or any other municipal revenues to any other form of government or that would expand the power to impose a sales or use tax to any other unit of government. The council supports legislation extending owner-occupied status to income-based rental housing for property tax purposes. The council supports legislation to raise the threshold for requiring a performance bond to $50,000. The council strongly encourages the legislature to direct that any available water development funds be used to support completion of the Lewis and Clark Regional Water System in South Dakota. And finally, the council supports legislation appropriating funds from the general fund for the purpose of providing advanced federal funds on a zero-interest reimbursable basis for construction for Lewis and Clark Rural Water System facilities in South Dakota. Since the June working session, Councilors Karski, Erpenbach, Erickson, Jameson, Executive Director Yvonne Taylor with the South Dakota Municipal League, Council and Administration staff met with area legislators to discuss these items. None of the legislators expressed opposition to any of these items. Also, I know that Councilor Staggers has an eighth item that he will be proposing that will allow municipalities the ability to exempt food from local sales tax. If a consensus is reached among council members, staff will plan to bring a resolution before the council next week. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions.
Councilor Erpenbach.
I just wanted to discuss item 4 just a little bit. I didn't feel at that meeting like there was a whole lot of legislative support for item 4. And I guess I wanted to see what the group thought. I'd propose that we take that one out. And then the other one that I would comment on is item 3. The Minnehaha County folks are concerned about the city wanting to, they would like to raise the per drink liquor tax and provide that to the county. And I made it, both Jim and I talked with Ken McFarland with the Minnehaha County Commission, and we said very clearly that is, we're not opposing that. All we're saying is that we're defending our stand, that we don't want to take away the city's share, the municipality's share of those existing taxes, that we're not arguing against the new proposal. And this would be on behalf of not only the city of Sioux Falls, but all the municipalities in the state of South Dakota. And so we made that, I think, very clear. I felt like after my conversation with Ken that he was comfortable with that. So that's my input.
Councilor Jameson.
Right, I think Councilor Erpenbach brought up number 4 as though some of the legislators weren't quite sure how that would work. I think there was a study or something that was tried to get done, but they couldn't even get that done in the legislature to look at it. But I think certainly our approach is to find another way to help affordable housing, right? And but you're right. I think there was some concerns about that issue because we didn't get anywhere before.
I'm sorry, the last part, Councilor. I missed what you said. at the end
Didn't
of
have
your-
support previously,
Okay.
that they had trouble with it in the legislature.
Right.
Councilor Erickson.
There has been trouble with it in the past. I don't think, I feel that it probably will be coming back again and again and again, just to try to study it and find ways to promote affordable housing. I think there was some hesitance because it's died 2 years in a row, but I don't know that legislators didn't support it. I know that it was passed out of the House pretty significantly 2 years in a row, and then it always seems to die on the Senate side. So I think there is some support there. I don't know that it would hurt to leave it on there, as this is a priority for us to maybe think outside of the box for the purpose of finding affordable housing. However, we may not see a change happen in the near future. That's just kind of my 2 cents, because I know that a lot of the people that were sitting at that table voted for something similar to that. It just can't seem to get out of the Senate.
And if I may comment on this too, I recall from that meeting, and it was a long day that day, but the legislators that were there expressed concern that past moves to change property tax have been defeated, but they hadn't seen anything that was very specific at affordable housing. And as Christine said, it did pass out of the House, similar, or not as quite as specific as this, but other property tax reforms had made it out of the House but died in the Senate. And one of the legislators commented that there's going to be a lot of members of the House moving over to the Senate in the upcoming session. So it might garner some support. You know, right now, this is a very, number 4 is a very, in its infancy as an idea, basically. And I know we had also talked at our working session to send this to our Public Services Committee for a study on what would the impact be to our local property tax base. So I'd prefer to keep it in there. Anytime we try to send anything to the state or the federal level even, it takes time, and pulling it out right away, I mean, it just, very few things happen on the first try. So I think giving it attention, and in Sioux Falls and other larger communities in the state of South Dakota, affordable housing is an issue. It's not an issue in every small town, but it is an issue in our larger communities.
Mm-hmm.
The other, if you look at the timeline for this, you will vote on a provisional legislative priority list this month, but then in the fall you'll revisit this again and you'll be able to amend it and change it following the action taken by the Municipal League in October. So if you do keep it in now, I know the Public Services Committee was going to look at it. You can look at what those findings are and make changes at that time. That's another option.
Councilor Staggers.
Yes, Jim mentioned that since we had our working session, I presented a proposal for him in regard to the sales tax on food. Many years ago, that was a real issue in South Dakota, and eventually the state legislature passed a measure providing some special help for low-income people in regard to their sales tax issue. However, that program was eventually done away with. And so there is nothing presently, to the best of my knowledge, about, for example, sales tax on food. And I was proposing this just as a possibility that the legislature might look at this and let municipalities have the option, if they wanted to delete the sales tax on food.
Questions, Councilor Urkenbach?
Jim, would you, because Jim and I have had this conversation too, I'm fully in support of taking the sales tax off food, but when I was talking about it, sort of brainstorming about it, Jim talked about, and I can't remember what it's called now, the reason we can't do that. What is that called, and what's that about?
In the early 2000s, there was the streamlined sales tax process, and this had to do with internet or catalog sales, trying to have uniformity across the country, and then approach Congress to pass a law allowing for the taxation of internet. And part of that streamlined process was to make sure that cities across the state tax the same way. Once this law was passed, I believe it was in 2003, 2004, the Rapid City Council continued to exempt food from sales tax, and it wasn't until an Attorney General's opinion that they ended up changing it to tax food.
And so the important thing is that was an Attorney General's opinion. It doesn't have anything to do with the state legislatures or state law.
It was his interpretation of state.
It is state law that it has to be uniform across the state, yep. And it has to include food. That's what the state law says. Yep. And so what needs to happen is not the choice for municipalities, but either to take the tax off food or to leave it on food. Those are, I mean, if that were gonna be number 8, if it were about a sales tax on food, it would be to remove it statewide so that it is uniform. And that then goes against Municipal League stand, and it takes away a huge income for cities and state.
If I could question Councilor Staggers, sure. I'm sorry, Jim. Are you talking about just the 2 cents on the city, or are you talking removing the sales tax?
Just the city.
Just the 2% that the city has.
If Councilor Urkenbach wants to have the entire state, that's okay too.
I had asked Dave Bixler, our budget analyst, to if he could find out what the budget implications would be. Dave, do you have some numbers you can share with us?
Dave Bixler, council staff. When I went back and looked at it, I came up with about $5.5 to $6 million that would be affected if we were to do it just on retail sales, food sales, not including any wholesale or any food, prepared food or that type of thing.
And that's both pennies?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that's just groceries then, basically?
Correct.
Just groceries, okay. Counselor Rolfing?
As I remember that law, if you will, that we had in South Dakota, one of the reasons it was taken off is because it was not used. Yeah, it just didn't, people did not apply for it and didn't get their refunds. I think they had a limit on the refund of like $700 or something like that, $400 per person or per family. And that might be a way to go about it for low-income people rather than trying to get the whole thing. If we could do that in Sioux Falls, if we wanted to do it that way for low-income people to refund some of the sales tax they have on food rather than trying to go about it on a state basis, which would be probably, we're barking up the wrong tree, but maybe we could do it on a limited basis for low income here in Sioux Falls. Our 2% or something like that. Yeah.
And along that vein, if I could, I don't know if anybody can answer this, or it's more hypothetical. People that are using EBT or WIC, I don't believe they pay. Councilor Erickson.
No, sales tax is not on those types of programs. And I was just doing a little quick search here of the sales tax rebate program that was then $838,000 was put back into Feeding South Dakota, was able to reuse, disperse the money because it wasn't being used. Some changes were made to that sales tax refund program saying if you're on food stamps, you don't qualify for the rebate because your sales tax on the food is already exempt. And so it's only for those low-income families who maybe don't qualify for food stamps but meet a certain threshold. And so that's why the program decreased drastically. And then this $838,000 was then dispersed through other nonprofit organizations to help on a statewide basis.
Okay. And Councilor Staggers, if I may, what you're proposing, is that kind of encompassed, but maybe not specifically, in our first legislative priority?
Well, not specifically, obviously.
Maybe not specifically, but we do, basically leave it up to we want it left up to the local government and the citizenry of that municipality to decide, if a tax should be applied or not, if we want to impose
If we could
one.
put something in that first point referring to the sales tax on food, that would be okay, too.
Councilor Anderson.
We still do have a timeline on this, so maybe we should have Jim and David with our city legal take a look and see what our options could be in any type of legislative priority here as far as that sales tax goes, because there seems to be a lot of different little variances here that I think we need to take a look at before we actually put something in here. Because I'm leading to, I do support it. I think it should be statewide on food, no sales tax. But, we have to look at what the state law is and what we can do to work around that or work with it. So I would say, at least we do have some time to take a look at this, and that could be an amendment to what we're looking at here now.
And of course, we have to work everything through the municipal league because it's kind of how we present this. I am going to, I guess, maybe questions or comments on Councilor Anderson's suggestion.
That's fine.
Is there any opposition? We can take our legislative priorities as they're presented, these 7, and come up with our, what do we call it, our provisional priorities, and it can be amended by at the time of the resolution. So
The staff was planning to bring this forward next week. The resolution could be amended at that time. Councilor Anderson, would you like me to bring the Attorney General's opinion on the sales tax issue, or what? I'm looking for more direction on.
How about we discuss it tomorrow? I can come in and we can discuss what we're looking at, maybe what options might be there with the Attorney General's opinion, and then we can send an email to the rest of the council and see what ideals we come up with.
Okay. We really haven't had a time to vet this properly in our working session, and I'm sensing some support, maybe not unanimous or even a majority, but it is a very good consideration. We do have time to think about it until this is presented. When would this come to us, Jim?
It would come next week.
Next Tuesday?
Yep.
Do we want to take any public input on this at this time? Yeah, it's not typically a forum that we use public input. We will take it next week. It being, yeah. So. Yeah, we're going to have to take it next week, ma'am. I'm sorry. It'll be at our, it's not something, it would be very out of our protocol to take public input during a legislative, or I'm sorry, during an informational meeting on our legislative priorities. So I'm sorry, I don't mean to shut you down, but we will take it next week when it is discussed. So, other questions or concerns?
I'd just like a further explanation for the public on item number 7.
I have Diane Best in the City Attorney's office. She's going to talk about it.
Thank you. There are 2 items, of course, on those legislative priorities that deal with supporting additional funds for Lewis and Clark Rural Water System. As you know, the city, of course, is connected to Lewis and Clark Rural Water System, but there is the next biggest area of South Dakota that is part of the design for the system is that reach between Sioux Falls and Madison, South Dakota. The expenditures that would be required to do the entire reach is in excess of $25 million, or a little over $25 million. It's design-wise, it can be broken up into several segments. One proposal would be to, the first segment out of Sioux Falls would also hook up Minnehaha Community Rural Water System. It would provide additional coverage for that rural water system. And then there would be an ability to provide water from Minnehaha Community through another rural water system, the Big Sioux Rural Water System, to what in the utility industry is called wheel the water, meaning you provide the water through someone else's lines, up to a connection near Madison, and then Lewis and Clark would need to build another segment on the outskirts of Madison. So the first 2 segments of the Madison connections would be actually the one nearest Sioux Falls and the one nearest Madison, and then wheel the water, so to speak, on an interim basis through the Big Sioux and rural water system. But that takes money even for those 2 first parts. That would be approximately in the $8 million range for those to be done. So there are different segments. There's need, obviously, to get the whole thing completed. The first priority here would encourage the legislature to direct that any available water development funds go to completion of the Lewis and Clark Regional Water System, and that would be any funds that are currently in the state omnibus water budget, or actually before the State Board of Water and Natural Resources to issue grants or loans to do that completion. The second proposal would support legislation actually appropriating additional funds from the state general fund in addition to its ordinary water budget, or whatever funds are available, for the purpose of providing advanced federal funds, meaning the federal government has not come through at the rate that was originally anticipated. There's thoughts that funds will continue to trickle in from the federal government. We can only hope sometime for more significant funds. But in the meantime, the South Dakota legislature last year appropriated $1 million for the purpose of providing advanced federal funds for the Lewis and Clark rural water system. And what that means is that Lewis and Clark rural water system would need to pay those funds back to the state if it ever got those federal funds. And this proposal, number 7, would do the same thing, only instead of $1 million, it would ask for, it would be support granting more than $1 million. And that same kind of proposal is something that is being dealt with over in Minnesota. And then the Iowa folks are looking as well as a similar proposal, so that Lewis and Clark is going to all of them. And Public Works within the city of Sioux Falls is obviously supporting that. And the process would work basically that the advance funds would go out to Lewis and Clark. Lewis and Clark would keep building with those advance funds. If federal funds come in during the construction phase, those federal funds would, I mean, depending obviously on what the legislature, the federal funding authorities state, but the proposal would be that the federal funds would also contribute to continuing in the building phase until all of the subscribers, water users, are hooked up to rural water. And then in Minnesota, it would be the same sort of arrangement. Continue to build till everybody's hooked up. And in Iowa, continue to build till everybody's hooked up. Then take those federal funds and start paying those back on a pro rata share of what each state has provided. And then lastly, the final funds, and you note that I said till everybody is hooked up, and then there would be final funds that are necessary to complete the design, which would be another water well near Vermilion to support the system for additional capacity. There would be some additional work that would be done over in Iowa to give them an additional, you would call it a loop system to provide some backup ability and some additional generators and that sort of thing. But so the basic service, then the federal payback, and the overall idea is, yes, Sioux Falls is being served, but for promotion of both economic development in southeast South Dakota, and also to accommodate the existing growth we're seeing, it's prudent to continue to support that to the maximum extent possible. The more users you have on the system, the healthier system to be fully paid by ratepayers. So that's the overall pitch, I guess. If you have any more questions, I'd be more than happy to answer.
Never ask an attorney a short question.
Yeah,
right?
I apologize. You can tell I'm happy to be a piece of making that pitch. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay, so we're going to send this for our resolution, and with the supposition that it may be modified next week for discussion and public input. So thank you, Jim. Thank you, counselors. That's going to wrap up our meeting today. We do have a Public Services Committee meeting that might bear some interest. So we'll begin that in about 10 minutes at 5:40. We'll begin our Public Services Committee meeting. Meeting adjourned.